Milfoil, hydrilla, pads, bulrushes, cattails, grass. What is happening, fishing friends? Welcome to another episode, and today we are talking about the swim jig. Now these are something that I've been using a whole lot more over the past couple years, so I wanted to take some time and share some things that I've learned and experimented with to up my swim jig game. I always hear people say, man, I just never catch anything on a jig. I don't throw them, I don't catch anything on them. Well, let's take, for example, this bait. Instead of throwing this, how about you get a little bit dirtier water, some grass? You might throw this type of swim jig. Yeah, all it is a swim jig with a vibrating blade on the front of it. Or how about this thing? Again, it's just a swim jig with a V-shaped wire and a couple blades on it, and you got a spinner bait. And I think for a lot of people, that's the thing. When do you use them? For the past couple years, for me, this was a clear water bait around grass. That's really the only time I brought it out. You know, it's a pretty subtle presentation, looks pretty lifelike. So Debo, why are you coming to us now talking about a swim jig? Well, it's because this bait carries over great. This has been my #1 producing moving search bait this summer by far. But it doesn't just stop in the summer months. This baby carries over great through the fall transition into fall when the fish are really feeding up on bluegill and shad and everything else because they're hungry. So what sets a swim jig apart? Well, first let's look at a few other type of jigs. If you're swimming a jig, you're casting it out and reeling it in. Now, if you have just a ball type style head, yes, these will do. You've got the line tied here. It's going to be coming in like this. This will swim nice, but once you start getting around any wood or anything you're swimming around, this head doesn't do that well. So next are the bottom type style jig. This is a jig that you would drag through the rocks. You can tell the rounded head. It's got the recessed eye line in there to keep the line protected when you're dragging it through stuff. And that's great, but you can see the line ties like this. So when you're pulling it through the water, it's going to be doing that. It's meant to bounce on the bottom, not to be swam. So I stay away from those. And the same thing goes for the old football head jig. Same thing. Line tie is going to go there, and when you tie it, yeah, it's going to kind of stick up there, meant for the bottom. So I stay away from those as well. Now, can you swim those? Yes, you could swim those, but there are a few characteristics of an actual swim jig that will make you a lot more effective. So when I'm picking out a swim jig, I break it down into 4 categories. The first thing I'm going to look at is the head. The second thing is going to be the hook size and thickness. The third thing is going to be the color. As you can see, we've got a bunch of those. And finally, the trailer. That's where it gets fun. So the first thing, the head style. You want a head style that's got a nose that points slightly up. What that's going to do is when you bring it through the water, that line tie is already pushed up at a 45-degree angle. Generally, how your line's coming down through the water like this, it's going to set perfectly and swim nice and straight. Whereas if you have a jig head like this where it's sitting up straight, it's going to tend to rotate that like on that ball head jig. That's why a 45-degree line tie is very nice for the swim jig. And if you're old school, that might remind you of the old Arky style head. Now this is just a flipping jig. This is a Nichols Lures Impact Flippin'. I've been using these a ton, very big fan of them, but not only just flipping them, you can swim these babies back. They work great for that. In fact, a couple videos ago, I'll link that up here, I was using this one single jig to flip and pitch around wood, to swim it back through the wood. It was a multi-purpose tool, flipping, pitching, and swimming. Now, additionally, with that turned up head where that line ties up at about 45 degrees, you want a swim jig that's got a little belly like this, where it's pointed up, kind of like the front of a boat. And what that's going to do is when you're bringing this over wood, you see how that line tie rides right up on top of that? Any sort of cover or anything you're bringing over, it's going to tend to ride right up over it. Whereas if you have a jig like this, when you go to bring it up over that wood, it's going to catch. And then this is, oh yeah, that's bad news because then you're getting stuck in the wood. And yeah. Additionally, a nice pointed jig head like this, you can see how it comes straight through, kind of cuts through like an arrow. This comes through grass. Awesome. And I know you're probably sick of it, but I have talked these things up a lot. These are those Grassmaster weed jigs. I finally got a box of one to show you. All Terrain Tackle makes these. This is what they look like. These things come through grass. Absolutely amazing. It's got a fat round jig head here. The line tie is recessed in. If you use a tri-lane knot on this thing is extremely, extremely weedless. Now the heads come in different shapes and sizes. You can see this is a Strike King swim jig. This has the eyes on it. Very, very nice for clear water. But again, it's got that 45-degree style line tie. It's got a nice aerodynamic head to come through the grass. Those are the characteristics you want to look for on the jig head. The next thing you want to pay attention to when you're picking out a swim jig is the hook size and thickness. There's different ways to fish swim jigs on different setups, and we'll go over that in part 2. Part 1, we're just going to cover all the setup. Part 2, we're actually going to get out on the water and fish that, look at the combos. But you can see here, this has a pretty light wire hook. I can actually bend this if I grab the head of it and grab the hook back here. I can flex that. I can bend this hook with just my hands. So you can imagine if you have a real stiff setup, you hook into a big fish, real good chance you're going to bend that out, especially if you're using braids. You've got to pay attention to that. Lighter wire hooks are going to need a different setup. And as you bump up, you get into a little bit heavier wire hooks. This is a local gentleman here in my town here in Iowa that made these. I can't find him anymore, but These are sweet. They've got like a little extra wide gap kind of hook on the back, and they're kind of middle of the road. I can't really bend that as easy, but it's still a pretty light wire hook, easy to penetrate the bass's mouth. Now, as you get up into something like these Grassmaster jigs, they're a little bit heavier still. Or if you're gonna do some double duty and use a flipping jig, this hook on this, I mean, I'm not bending that one. That's a very tough hook. Great for a heavier setup when you're fishing around wood, especially if you're swimming this back through wood. You want something that can hold up to that. The next thing I look at is color, and you can see I break it down into 3 sections. Number 1 is gonna be my bluegill imitations. So with this, it's gonna be some sort of green pumpkin. You can see this has some green and purple flake in it. This one just has kind of the yellowish. You can dip the tail to give that chartreuse look to it, but a green pumpkin chartreuse. That's my first. So if you're fishing a lot of ponds or a place where there's a lot of bluegill, use those. Next, I'm going to move into my shad and baitfish imitation. So any sort of white or white with glitter. This is going to be more of a clear water color, you know, that clear water baitfish, kind of translucent, real natural colors. Those are going to be the second way I fish it. And finally is in the real dirty water. I'm just going to go with a real dark bait, black and blue, black and purple. The darker the color, the more of a silhouette it's gonna make in that real dirty, muddy, mucky water. Last but not least, the part that everybody has the most fun with, picking a trailer. Man, these can load your bag down. You can, oh, where do you start? Well, when I go to the bluegill imitations, I have found that the Rage Menace has worked the best. They've got a baby version, a little bit smaller, and a little bit larger 4-inch version. But these are my go-to for sure when I'm using a bluegill imitation type swim jig. Now, if you're somebody that likes to flip and pitch jigs or Texas rigs, you've probably already got some of these. And these are also a great trailer. They've got a real good flappy back end on it. And keep in mind, the warmer the water, the more action I want on that trailer. As that water starts to get colder, I go over to something like this. And when I'm trying to imitate a shad, you know, a bait fish, I'll tend to go with some sort of boot tail. Now this one doesn't have a lot of kick. This is a little bit more subtle, but as that water cools down, you're gonna want something with a little bit less movement. So something like this sort of paddle tail or a Rage swimmer. You can also go to a Kitech, the Fat Impact, or if you want something that's a little less bulky, you can go with one of these little swing impacts. They're a very small, tight package, but they've got a really good tail wag on them. So some sort of boot tail is a good third option as well. And that's really all I do. The craw trailers, the Rage Menace, and some sort of paddle tail, those are really the trailers that I keep it to pretty simple. So what are the advantages and disadvantages of the swim jig? Well, the swim jig is very versatile. Again, you can take something like this or even something like this, flip and pitch it around wood, you can swim it back. It's one bait that can do really anything. These style baits also come through cover well, whether you're going through grass or wood. These don't really tend to get hung up that bad. So what are the disadvantages of the swim jig? Well, the primary action is going to be that trailer back here kicking and flapping, and that's another thing. You want to make sure you trim your skirt so it's not going to interfere with the actual feed or the paddle tail back here. You can see like on this one, I cut these short. You want to make sure that this is the primary action of your bait. You want to make sure it's got room to move. But with that being said, that's it. It doesn't have the advantage of these, you know, a big vibrating blade, you know, a thumping blade or a big vibrating blade like this jig. The simplicity is the key to this. So this can have a drawback too. It doesn't have the drawing power maybe of those. So for example, if you're fishing real dirty water, you might be better off going to that bladed jig. The swim jig is really more of a sight bait. So, you know, the fish need to see it and it's not going to have a whole lot of thump to attract them in. Whereas something like this, they're going to feel that vibration with their lateral line. Even if they can't see it, this will get their attraction. Then once they come in, you've got all sorts of other things to help get that bite. So that's the swim jig in a nutshell. Comment below and let me know what questions you have about the swim jig. Do you already fish it? Do you have other tips that you think will help more fishing friends? Or are there other things you want to know? Comment below. I would love to help you out. Again, this is only part 1 of 2. Part 2, we're going to take these out on the water, talk about the combos, how to fish it, where to fish it, all the fun stuff. So as always, I appreciate all of you getting your daily dose of DEBO'S fishing. Couldn't do it without all of you. And till next time.